Years ago in the land of Egypt, fantastic monuments were built for the kings, known as pharaohs, using the labor of thousands of slaves. These slaves were God's chosen people, the children of Israel. The Egyptians were cruel to their slaves. They beat them to make them work harder. The Israelites prayed that God would deliver them from this hard life, hear their prayers, and take them out of the land of Egypt. Then God chose a leader for his people, a man by the name of Moses. Moses was a man who the Lord could trust, and Moses trusted in the Lord. Moses was to be used by God to deliver his people from under the hardship of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Moses appeared before the king and boldly told him what God had planned for the children of Israel. God wanted Pharaoh to let his people go. The king was scornful of Moses. Pharaoh replied, "Who is this God to tell the great Pharaoh what to do?" Moses warned Pharaoh that unless the children of Israel were set free, God would send great plagues upon the land of Egypt, but Pharaoh refused to listen. On one occasion the Lord turned all the water in the land to blood. The stench of dead fish filled the air and they could not drink the water. But Pharaoh still refused to let the people go. Another time God caused the land of Egypt to be overrun with frogs. Frogs were in the streets, in the houses, in their beds, the frogs were everywhere. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened. On another occasion, flies were sent by the millions to torment the Egyptians, and yet the king would not let the people go. God continued to deal with Pharaoh. Finally the king had had enough. He called for Moses and told him to take the children of Israel, get out of Egypt, and stay out. It was a happy day for the children of Israel. They were free at last. God had heard their prayers. For 430 years, the Israelites, and their ancestors before them, had been held in bondage in the land of Egypt. The Israelites gathered up their belongings and were ready to go. Soon Moses was leading them out into the desert. A long, hot, hard journey was ahead, but the people were happy. They were heading for a new life and was far from the whips of the Egyptians. What a sight they were, a whole nation of people, hundreds of thousands of them with their cattle and all their belongings spread out across the desert. One day, something happened that caused a murmur of fear. The Israelites pointed and whispered. What had they seen that caused such a commotion? A huge, strange cloud appeared before them that they had never seen before. The people stood still in amazement. Then Moses said to the people, "Don't be afraid, the Lord God himself is appearing as a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. The Lord is with us and is leading the way." The Israelites had been headed directly to the land of Canaan, and if they continued on that route they would soon come into the land of the Philistine, and that would mean war. The Lord knew that if his people had to go into battle, they'd become discouraged, and want to return to Egypt. So God spoke to Moses and told him to change direction. The Lord wanted them to turn south towards the Red Sea. Moses may not have understood why, but he trusted in the Lord and gave the order to turn towards the Red Sea. The people did not understand either, but they did what their leader told them to do. Pharaoh had spies watching, and of course they were ready to report every move the children of Israel made. When the spies told Pharaoh that the Israelites were changing their direction, the king got out his maps and began to study the situation. Pharaoh was regretting that he had freed the slaves that had served him so long, and now they were walking into a trap. Soon they would find themselves with no place to go. There would be mountains on each side, and in front of them would be the Red Sea. If Pharaoh brought his armies in from the rear, the Israelites would be surrounded. Pharaoh took the Egyptian army and moved out across the desert and traveled as fast as they could. The Egyptians' horses raised up quite a bit of dust, and when the Israelites saw the dust clouds far in the distance they knew right away what it meant. The Egyptians were coming after them. The people of Israel were afraid, and they were angry with Moses for having brought them out into the wilderness to die. They seemed to have forgotten that God was with them. The children of Israel cried out to Moses that they should have stayed in Egypt as slaves than to be slain in the desert by the Egyptian army. Moses' faith was not shaken. He said, "Fear not, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." Then something strange happened. Pharaoh's soldiers saw a dark cloud moving in between their camp and the camp of Israel. On the side of the Egyptians, the cloud made everything so dark that they thought they'd better wait until morning to recapture their slaves. But on the other side of the cloud it was light. To the children of Israel, it was a pillar of fire. They could see everything clearly, and the light showed they were trapped, hemmed in by mountains and the Red Sea. Any minute the Egyptians would come riding down on them and there was no place to go. Why had God allowed this terrible thing to happen to them? As the people watched, Moses walked up to the edge of the Red Sea. Then Moses lifted up his staff and a strong wind began to blow. Then the waters began to part. Before long, the strong wind cleared a path, right through the middle of the sea. Although the children of Israel were frightened, they followed their leader in between those huge walls of water. All through the night, the children of Israel marched through the sea on the path that the Lord made for them. Finally, the last person arrived safely on the other side. Pharaoh was told that the Israelites were getting away. He shouted the orders to pursue them at once. In no time, the entire Egyptian army was in pursuit and they followed the Israelites right into the passage prepared in the Red Sea. Then, the Lord caused all sorts of things to happen. The wheels came off the chariots, there were confusion and panic in the ranks of the Egyptian army. Pharaoh's soldiers were terrified. "Their God is fighting against us," they shouted. "Let's turn back before it is too late." But it was already too late. God told Moses to stretch out his staff again over the sea. And the chariots, the horsemen and all the host of Pharaoh were covered. Not one of them escaped. So it was that all of Pharaoh's army, because they willfully acted against the will of God, were destroyed in the midst of the Red Sea. But Moses and the people sang a song of praise and gave thanks to God for the miraculous way he had delivered them from their enemies.